My father had a stroke on a Thursday afternoon in March, and I found out through a voicemail from the hospital because my sister couldn't be bothered to call me directly. That detail probably tells you everything you need to know about how this story goes. My name is Martin Ashford. I'm 43 years old. I've lived in Kelowna, British Columbia for the past 11 years, in a semi-detached on Rutland Road, that my wife Joelle and I bought when the market was still something a person could reasonably navigate. I work in project management for a mid-sized construction firm. I coach my son's hockey team on weekends when the season's running. I am, by any reasonable standard, a man with a full life. A good one, mostly. My father's name is Bernard Ashford. Bernie, to everyone who knows him. He's 71 now. He was 69 when the stroke happened. He lives alone in the house in Sudbury, Ontario, where my sister Claudine and I grew up. A 3-bedroom bungalow on Lakeshore Drive, with a detached garage and a backyard that backs onto a creek. He retired at 65 from 30 years at the Falconbridge mine site. He played curling on Tuesday mornings. He volunteered at the food bank on Thursdays. He drove my mother to every single one of her chemotherapy appointments for 16 months before she passed, 9 years ago, and he never once complained about it. Not to me, not to anyone. My mother's name was Helen Ashford. She was the kind of woman who made extra casseroles for the neighbors when she herself was too sick to eat. I think about that often. I've thought about it a lot more in the last 2 years than I ever did before. When my father called Claudine to tell her he'd been diagnosed with a transient ischemic attack, what they call a TIA, a warning stroke, and that his neurologist at Health Sciences North was recommending he not drive for at least 8 weeks, not live alone without some form of support, and begin a supervised rehabilitation program 3 times a week, Claudine did what she has always done when reality becomes inconvenient. She managed it from a distance. She called me that evening. I remember I was unloading the dishwasher. "Dad had a stroke," she said. "What? When? Is he okay?" It was a TIA, not a full stroke. "He's stable. He's home already." "He's home?" "By himself. He wanted to go home. You know how he is." I did know how he was. He was the man who drove himself to the emergency room the morning of the stroke because he didn't want to make a fuss. The nurse who admitted him told him that was the most Canadian thing she had ever heard in her career. "Claudine, he can't be alone right now. His neurologist said he needs support. Someone has to go up there." There was a pause on the line that I recognized. The particular pause Claudine uses when she's already decided something and is waiting to see if you'll figure it out on your own so she doesn't have to say it. "I can't go, Martin. I've told you before. I just can't uproot everything right now. Zach's position at the firm is still not secure, and we've got the Costa Rica trip booked for April. If we cancel at this point, we lose the deposits." I set a mug down on the counter. Gently. "Dad had a stroke, TIA, and he's stable. I'm not saying we ignore it. I'm saying we need to be smart about this. He's got neighbors. He's got the curling club. He's been told not to drive. His curling friends are in their 70s, Claudine. I'll call his doctor. I'll arrange a check-in service. There are agencies that do this, Martin. It doesn't have to be one of us physically there." Something went very still in me during that phone call. Not anger, exactly. More like the moment before anger, when you realize a thing is exactly as bad as you feared it was going to be. I drove to Sudbury 3 days later, 14 hours round trip. Joelle took the week without complaint, rearranged her own schedule, handled everything at home. I packed a bag and made the drive east on the Trans-Canada with a coffee thermos and a podcast I didn't absorb a single word of. My father was sitting at the kitchen table when I got there, doing a crossword puzzle, wearing the same flannel shirt he'd had since 2008. He looked smaller than I remembered, not frail. Just smaller. Like the house had gotten bigger around him. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," I said. I stayed for 10 days. I drove him to his rehabilitation appointments at the Ramsey Lake Health Center, 3 times a week, 40 minutes each way. I restocked his fridge, figured out his medication schedule, fixed the motion sensor light on the garage that had been flickering since autumn. I called his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Greta Palomino, 68, who agreed to check in on him mornings when I had to leave. Greta turned out to be one of those people who treats a favor like a moral commitment. Within a week, she was arriving with muffins. Claudine called twice while I was there, both times to ask how he was doing, not once to say she should be there too. When I got home, I sat in my driveway for a while before going inside. Joelle met me at the door and handed me a beer, and didn't ask me anything for 20 minutes. That's the kind of woman she is. She knew. Over the next 6 months, I became the person who managed our father's recovery from 1,200 kilometers away. I was the one the rehabilitation clinic called when there were updates. I was the one who coordinated with his GP, a kind and overextended man named Dr. Vasquez, who treated my father with the particular care that small city family doctors extend to patients they've known for decades. I arranged for a weekly meal delivery service. There's a program through the Sudbury Food Bank I didn't know existed before all of this. I called Dad every other day. Sometimes I just talked about hockey. That's fine. Sometimes the point isn't information, it's the sound of a familiar voice on the other end of the line. Claudine arranged a Zoom call for his birthday in June. She bought him an Amazon gift card. She texted me afterward to say she thought the call had gone really well. What I did not do was tell my father how little Claudine was doing, because he loved her and she was his daughter, and he would have defended her, and I didn't have the energy for that particular conversation. What I did instead was what my mother would have recognized immediately. I showed up, and I kept showing up, and I didn't make noise about it. But let me tell you something about carrying something alone, because it matters to this story. There's a particular exhaustion that comes not from the thing itself but from doing the thing, while someone who should be doing it with you is in Costa Rica. It's a specific weight. It doesn't kill you. It doesn't even slow you down most of the time. But it is there, and you know it is there, and eventually you do what you can with it. By September, my father had been cleared to drive. His speech was back to normal. His neurologist, Dr. Yip at HSN, used the phrase remarkable recovery for his age, and my father said, "Well, I've got a good son." Not daughters, plural son. I went back to Sudbury in October for a long weekend. Greta Palomino made us dinner on the Saturday. A man from Dad's curling club, a retired civil engineer named Frank Ostrowski, 74, had been picking him up for the Tuesday morning session since the driving restriction lifted. Dad introduced me to Frank on Sunday at the rink, and Frank shook my hand and said, "Your dad's been talking about you since March. Good for you." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just thanked him. On the drive home, I thought about Claudine. I thought about the conversations we'd had, the particular texture of her absence, the way she had made the math of her own priorities sound so reasonable in the moment. Zach's job security, the Costa Rica deposits, the logistical difficulty of uprooting everything. All of it technically true, none of it the actual reason. The actual reason was that Claudine, at 46, had spent her entire adult life becoming very skilled at being unavailable at the moments that cost something. She'd done it when Mum was sick, too. I was the one in the chemo waiting room. I was the one who learned which nurses were gentle with the IV line. I was the one who drove home in silence afterward, because there was nothing to say. I had been angry about it then. By the time Dad's stroke happened, I wasn't angry anymore. I just knew who she was. When someone shows you who they are, clearly and completely and more than once, the grief of it eventually reaches its end. What remains is something quieter, the clear-eyed knowledge of a thing. I'm telling you all of this because you need to understand the weight of what I was carrying, so that what happened next makes sense. Not as a justification, just as context. Because what happened next arrived on a completely ordinary Tuesday morning in January, and nothing about the morning suggested it was coming. It was 6:45 a.m. I was pouring coffee. Joelle was upstairs getting our son Eli ready for school. The hockey bag was by the door because practice was Thursday, and I hadn't put it away. Normal January morning in Kelowna. My phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at it. Claudine, not a text. An actual phone call. Claudine does not make phone calls. I stood there and looked at the screen for a moment. Then I picked up. Martin. Her voice was wrong immediately. Thick, unsteady. Nothing like the practiced composure she usually brings to difficult conversations. What happened? It's Zach. A long breath. We've separated. I sat down at the kitchen table when? Last week. He moved out on Friday. I wasn't ready to talk about it. A pause. I'm not okay, Martin. I'm really not okay. I'm sorry, Claudine. And I meant it. Whatever else was true, her marriage ending was a real thing that mattered. That's a hard thing to go through. I can't be in this apartment by myself. I can't. It's to voice broke. Actually broke, in a way I hadn't heard from her since we were children. I need someone here. I need family. There it was. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a crow was doing something in the backyard. Eli came thundering down the stairs in his socks, and Joelle caught him at the bottom, and I heard their voices in the particular domestic sound of a regular Tuesday. I thought about the parking lot of the Ramsey Lake Health Center in Sudbury, waiting in the truck for my father to finish his first rehabilitation session, not knowing how it was going to go, calling nobody about it, because there was nobody to call. I thought about the phone call in March, the particular pause before Claudine said the Costa Rica deposits. I thought about my father's kitchen at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night. eating crackers from the box because I'd forgotten to make dinner for myself after getting his sorted, listening to him fall asleep in the next room and thinking, at least he's breathing. I thought about something a counselor had told Joelle and me years ago, when we were going through our own hard stretch, in a different context entirely. She'd said that the word unavailable is almost always a polite way of saying, I have decided this is not worth my time. Not always, but almost always. I took a slow breath. Claudine, I said, I can't deal with this right now. Silence. Not long, maybe 4 seconds, but it landed. I could hear it land in the exact way that a specific collection of words lands when the person hearing them recognizes them from somewhere they would rather forget. What? Her voice had gone flat. I have things going on, work is heavy right now. Joelle and I have commitments. I kept my voice even. Not cold. Not unkind. Even. I'm not in a position to drop everything. Martin, my marriage just ended. I know. And I'm sorry. That's genuinely terrible. I need someone here. I'm by myself in this apartment. I know what that's like, I said it quietly. I know exactly what that's like. A longer silence this time. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said, but it's true. I could hear her breathing. The sound of someone working very hard to hold something together. You're seriously telling me you won't come? After everything, I'm not telling you you're on your own, I said. I'm not going to send you a gift card and call it checking in. I'm telling you what I can and can't do right now, and being honest about it. That's different. Another silence. Longer. Then quieter, something shifted in her voice. Less performance, more actual person. What would you be willing to do? And that's the question that changes everything. Not the demands. Not the defensiveness. That small, stripped-down question from someone who has just run out of other options. I'll call you, I said, every day while you're in the worst of it. I'll make sure you're not going through this without someone to talk to. And I want to help you figure out what you actually need. Not what's easiest to ask for, but what would actually help. There are real resources. EAP through your firm if you still have benefits. A therapist, which I think you've needed for a long time, and I say that without judgment. There are people who specialize in life transition for people exactly in your situation. That's not the same as family being there, she said. No, I agreed. It isn't. A long pause. The crow was gone from the backyard. Joelle had taken Eli to school while I'd been on the call, and I hadn't even heard the door. Do you want to talk about what's actually going on? I said. Not the apartment, not the logistics. What's actually going on with you? She was quiet for a moment, then she said yes, and we talked for almost 2 hours. I learned things I hadn't known, that Claudine and Zach had been struggling for far longer than I realized, that the Costa Rica trip, the deposits, the logistical excuses of the previous spring, had in part been about a marriage she was trying to hold together with enough busyness that neither of them had to look directly at it. That the apartment she was calling from felt suffocating not just because Zach was gone, but because she was in it for the first time, without a structure around her life that told her who she was and what her days were for. I don't actually know what I do, she said at one point, in a way that I don't think was about her job. Without the schedule, without the plans. I don't know who I am without something to manage. Yeah, I said, I know. I should have come in March, she said. It was quiet. She didn't embellish it. She just said it and left it there. I didn't tell her she should have. I didn't tell her what those 10 days had cost me, or the 6 months afterward, or the particular loneliness of being the one who showed up without acknowledgement while she sent gift cards. I wasn't going to do that on this call. There would be time for honesty in that direction, and it would come, but not at 10 in the morning while she was still raw. What I instead was, both things can be true. I understand why you made the choices you made, and it also left me alone in ways that mattered. We can hold both of those. A pause. Is that something a therapist told you? Joelle, I said. She almost laughed. Almost. I called her the next day, and the day after. I connected her with a therapist in her area, a woman named Dr. Selena Kwan, who a colleague of Joelle's had recommended, and who takes direct billing through most Ontario group benefits plans. I did not drive to Toronto. I did not cancel anything. I did not absorb her crisis into my life so thoroughly that mine disappeared around it. What I did was call her every day for 3 weeks, and then every 2 or 3 days, and eventually once a week when the calls became less urgent and more just. Checking in, being her brother, being present in the way that is sustainable rather than the way that burns you hollow. It has been about 5 months now. Claudine is in therapy. She has told me more than once that it is helping in ways she didn't expect. She has started doing a pottery class on Wednesday evenings, which I find genuinely surprising and also exactly right for her. She came out to Kelowna for a week in May, the first time she'd visited us here in 3 years. She and Eli spent an entire afternoon at the lake, and she taught him how to skip stones, and I watched from the dock and thought about all the years we'd lost to distance and busyness, and the choices people make when they think there will always be more time. My father came out too in June. Greta Palomino drove him to the airport in Sudbury, which she had offered to do months before anyone asked. Frank Ostrowski had apparently told him, "Bernie, just go. You've earned a trip." Dad sat at our kitchen table drinking coffee and watching the Okanagan summer through the window like it was something he needed to memorize. On the last night before his flight home, Claudine called while he was here. Video call. She talked to him for 40 minutes. About Mum, mostly. About things neither of them had said out loud in years. I made myself scarce. That was their conversation, not mine. After Dad sat quietly for a moment and then said, "She's doing better, she is," I said. "It's good you were there for her." He meant it in the way he meant most things. Straightforwardly, without knowing all the layers. I didn't correct him. I said, "Yeah, I think she needed someone." "She's always been the one who runs from the hard things," he said. He wasn't unkind about it. He just said it like a fact. Like a man who has watched his children for 40 years and knows what he knows. "She's working on it," I said. He nodded. "Your mother would have been glad." I thought about my mother, about the extra casseroles she made for the neighbors while she was sick herself, about the way she never announced her generosity, just did it, quietly, as a matter of course. I thought about the 10 days in Sudbury, about Greta Palomino's muffins, and Frank Ostrowski's terrible driving directions, and the particular feeling of sitting in a waiting room with a thermos of cold coffee, just being present for someone, because that's what they needed, and you were the one who showed up. Those two things, the people who show up and the people who run, they're not fixed categories. That's the thing I've come to understand. Claudine ran for a long time. She is trying now not to. That counts for something. What I want to say to you, if you're listening, if you're in the position I was in, is this. You are not obligated to make yourself endlessly available to people who measured your crisis against their Costa Rica deposits and chose the deposits. That is not what love requires. Love requires honesty. It requires showing up in ways that are real and sustainable and mutual. It requires sometimes letting someone sit in the discomfort of their own choices long enough to understand what those choices actually cost. I didn't say those 4 words to Claudine as a punishment. I'm not built that way. And frankly, punishment is usually more about the person delivering it than the person receiving it. I said them because they were true. Because I genuinely could not drop my life on a Tuesday morning for a crisis that, in some essential way, Claudine had been manufacturing for years by avoiding every hard thing until they compounded into this one enormous hard thing. And because the most useful thing I could offer her was not my physical presence but a mirror. 4 words that looked exactly like hers. She heard them. That was the whole point. The people who choose to show up without being required to. Greta, Frank Ostrowski, Joelle. The women at the food bank who packed my father's weekly delivery with the particular care of people who understand that food is never just food. Those people are not the consolation prize. They are the actual prize. They are what it looks like when someone has made the decision to show up for another person as an act of genuine will, without obligation, without the currency of blood relation or guilt. I am not estranged from my sister. I don't want to be. But the relationship we are building now is built on something the old one wasn't, and I think we both know it. It's built on the fact that she called me in January, and I told her the truth, and she sat with the truth long enough to ask the question that actually mattered. What would you be willing to do? That's the question that changes things, not demands, not guilt. That question. Claudine asked it, and something shifted. We are somewhere real now. Imperfect and ongoing and honest, which is the only version of a relationship I have any interest in maintaining at this point in my life. My father is doing well. His numbers are good. Dr. Vasquez told him at his last appointment that his recovery has been about as clean as you can hope for at his age, and my father thanked him and then asked whether he thought the Leafs were going to make the playoffs. Dr. Vasquez, who is from Guadalajara and has been here long enough to understand what the Leafs mean to people from Sudbury, apparently just shook his head and said, "Bernie, let's not make this harder than it already is. I'm Martin Ashford. I'm 43 years old. I have a good life. It got a little better once I learned that you are allowed to love someone, fully and without condition, and still tell them what you can and cannot give. That's not withholding. That's just honesty. And sometimes honesty is the most useful thing one person can hand to another.